explained. They camped in the plaza, blackening the cottonwoods with their fires and driving forth the sleeping birds. The flames lighting up the wretched town to its darkest pens and bringing forth even the blind tottering with their hands. Outstretched toward that conjectural day, Glanton and the judge with the Brown brothers rode out to the hacienda of General Thulahaga, where they were received and given. Their dinner and the night passed without incident. In the morning, when they had saddled their mounts and were assembled in the square to ride out, they were approached by a family of itinerant magicians seeking safe passage up country as Janos Glanton looked down at them from his place at the head of the column. Their goods were piled up in tattered panniers lashed to the backs of 3 burros, and they were a man and his wife and a grown boy and a girl. They were dressed in fool's costumes with stars and half moons embroidered on, and the once gaudy colors were faded and pale from the dust of the road, and they looked a set of right wonderful cast on this evil terrain. The old man camped forward and took the bridle of Glanton's horse. "Get your hands off the horse," said Glanton. He spoke no English, but he did as he was told. He commenced to put forth his case. He gestured, he pointed back toward the others. Glanton watched him. Who knows if he heard it? He turned and looked at the boy and at the 2 women, and he looked down at the man again. "What are you?" he said. The man held his ear toward Glanton and looked up with mouth agape. I said, "What are you? Are you a show?" He looked back toward the others. "A show," said Glanton. "Buffoons." The man's face brightened. "See?" he said. "See, buffoons. Tudo." He turned to the boy. "Casimiro, los perros." The boy ran to one of the burros and began to tug among the packings. He came up with a pair of bald and battered animals slightly larger than rats and pale brown in color, and he pictured them into the air and caught them on the palms of his hands, where they began to pirouette imminently. "Meyer, Meyer," called the man. He was fishing about in his pockets, and soon he was juggling 4 small wooden balls in front of Glanton's horse. The horse snorted and lifted its head, and Glanton leaned over the saddle and spat and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Ain't that the drizzlin' shits," he said. The man was juggling and calling back over his shoulder to the women and the dogs where it in sin, and the women were turning to in preparation of something when Glanton spoke to them on. "Don't start no more of that crazy shit. You want to ride with us, you fall in the back. I promise you, nothin' vamonos." He rode on. The company clanked into motion, and the juggler ran shooing the women toward Burroughs, and the boy stood wide-eyed with the dogs under his arm until the man spoke to him. They rode out through the rabble, past great cones of slag and tailings. The people watched them go. Some of the men stood hand in hand, like lovers, and a small child led forth a blind man on Astrid to a place of vantage. At noon they crossed the stony bottom of the Casas Grandes River, and they rode along Aben, above the gaunt rill of water past a place of bones, where Mexican soldiers had slaughtered an encampment of Apaches some years gone. Women and children, the bones and skulls, scattered along the bench for half a mile, and the tiny limbs and toothless paper skulls of infants, like the ossature of small apes, at their place of murder, and old remnants of weathered bats' cray, and broken pots among the gravel. They rode on. The river led a lima-green corridor of trees down out of the barren mountains. To the west lay the ragged Karkai, and to the north the Animus peaks, dim and blue. They made camp that night on a windy plateau among Pythian and juniper, and the fires leaned downwind in the darkness, and hot chains of sparks raced among the scrub. The jugglers had loaded the burros and began to set up a large gray tent. The canvas was scrolled with Arcanon. It flapped and lurched, stood towering, looked, and wrapped them about. The girl lay on the ground, holding to one corner. She began to drag through the sand. The juggler took small steps. The woman's eyes were rigid in the light, as the company watched the four of them all. Clucetto, the snapping cloth were towed mutely from sight beyond the reach of the firelight, and in teeth, howling desert-like supplicants at the skirts of some wild and irate goddess. The pickets saw the tent lumber horribly away into the night. When the family of jugglers returned, they were arguing among themselves, and the man went again to the edge of Thevia light, and peered out upon the wrathful blackness, and spoke to it, and gestured with his fistner. Would he return until the woman sent the boy to fetch him? Now he sat, staring at the flames while the family unpacked. They watched him uneasily. Glanton watched him also. "Showman," he said. The juggler looked up. He put one finger to his chest. "You," said Glanton. He rose and shuffled forward. Glanton was smoking a slender black cigar. He looked up at the juggler. "You tell fortunes." The juggler's eyes skittered. "Como," he said. Glanton put the cigar in his mouth and mimed a deal of cards with his hands. "La baraja es aiden para adivinar la suerte." The juggler tossed one hand aloft. "See, see," he said, shaking his head with vigor. "Todo, todo." He held up one finger, and then turned and made his way to the trove of shoddy, partly offload from the burrows. When he returned, he was smiling affably and manipulating the cards very nimbly. "Venga," he called. "Venga." The woman followed him. The juggler squatted before Glanton and spoke to him in a loud voice. He turned and looked at the woman, and he riffled the cards and rose and took her by the hand and led her over the ground, away from the fire, and seated her facing out into the night. She swept up her skirt and composed herself, and he took from his shirt a kerchief and with it bound her eyes. "Bueno," he called. "Puedes ver?" "No, nada?" "Nada," said the woman. "Bueno," said the juggler. He turned with the deck of cards and advanced toward Glanton. The woman sat like a stone. Glanton waved him away. "Los caballeros," he said. The juggler turned. The black was squatting by the fire watching, and when the juggler fined cards he rose and came forward. The juggler looked up at him. He folded the cards and fanned them again, and he made a pass over them with his left hand and held them forth, and Jackson took a card and looked at it. "Bueno," said the juggler. "Bueno." He admonished caution with a forefinger to his thin lips, and took the card and held it aloft and turned with it. The card popped once sharply. He looked at the company seated about the fire. They were smoking. They were watching. He made a slow sweep before him with the card outheld. It bore the picture of a fool and harlequin and a cat. "Il tonto," he called. "El tonto," said the woman. She raised her chin slightly, and she began a sing-song chant. The Darkerin stood solemnly, like a man arraigned. His eyes shifted over the company. The judge Satoop wind from the fire naked to the waist, himself like some great pale deity, and when the black size reached his, he smiled. The woman ceased. The fire fled down the wind. "Quiet, quiet," cried the juggler. She paused. "El Negro," she said. "El Negro," cried the juggler, turning with the card. His clothes snapped in the wind. The woman raised her voice and spoke again, and the black turned to his mates. "What does she say?" The juggler had turned and was making small bows to the company. "What does she say, Tobin?" The ex-priest shook his head. "Idolatry, Blackie, idolatry. Do not mind her." "What does she say, Judge?" The judge smiled. With his thumb he had been rooting small life from the folds of his hairless skin. and now he held up one hand with the thumb and forefinger pressed together in a gesture that appeared to be a benediction, until he flung something unseen into the fire before him. What does she say? What does she say? I think she means to say that in your fortune lie our fortunes all. And what is that fortune? The judge smiled blandly, his pleated brow not unlike a dolphin's. Are you a drinking man, Jackie? No more than some. I think she'd have you beware the demon rum. Prudent counsel enough. What do you think? That ain't no fortune. Exactly so. The priest is right. The black frowned at the judge, but the judge leaned forward to regard him. Wrinkle not thy supple brow at me, my friend. All will be known to you at last. To you, as to every man. Now a number of the company seated there seemed to weigh the judge's words, and some tornado look at the black. He stood in uneasy ennui, and at length he stepped back from the firelight, and the juggler rose and made a motion with the cards, sweeping them in a fan before him, and then proceeding along the perimeter, past the boots of the men with the cards outheld. Asaf, they would find their own subject. Kin, they whispered among them. They were right, loath, all. When he came before the judge, who sat with one hand splayed across the broad expanse of his stomach, raised a finger and pointed. Young Blasarius yonder, he said. Como, el joven, whispered the juggler. He looked about him slowly, with an air of mystery, until heavened, with his eyes the one so spoken. He moved past the adventurers, quickening his step, stood before the kid. He squatted with the cards, and fanned them with a slow rhythmic motion akin to the movements of certain birds at court. Una carta, he wheezed. The kid looked at the man, and he looked at the company about. See, said the juggler, offering the cards. He took one. He'd not seen such cards before, yet the one he held seemed familiar to him. Had turned it upside down, and regarded it, and he turned it back. The juggler took the boy's hand in his own, and turned the card so he could see. Then he took the card and held it up.